Welcome to World Builders Anonymous. Kick that world building addiction and actually finish that novel with your hosts Vito and John.
Cool. Shall we jump in?
Yeah, I mean, usually we're like in the middle of some cool conversation, and we just kind of jump into our welcome to the podcast moment. But right now we're kind of at a low point.
Well,
It's just
hello, audience. We didn't see you there.
Hi
We were
there.
in the middle of a very intense and interesting conversation.
Yeah,
We're glad you stopped by.
Yeah.
Why don't you join us? Pull up a chair. Gather yourself up by the fire and just go ahead and invite yourself in.
Unless you're in your car, then there's probably no fire, hopefully, and just kind of keep driving and don't die while you listen.
You're ruining
to us. Okay. Anyway, welcome to the podcast.
Hey everyone.
It's different every time. Yeah, I have nothing to crack open today. No beverages, unfortunately. So there's none of that. But we'll try to make it interesting for you anyway.
New and now 100% beverage-free World Builders Anonymous podcast.
Well, for this week at least. We'll see what happens next week. I just have nothing to drink right now. That's more interesting than my empty pot of coffee. So I'd have to make more. But anyway,
That would take work, and as we know, authors don't do anything.
Yeah, we just like to sit there and
stay home and lie around.
That's a VeggieTales reference for you guys.
It is.
You are welcome.
It is. Your life is now better.
You probably recognize that if you're homeschooled. We'd love to hear from you if you are homeschooled or were homeschooled, because
shout out to
we were homeschoolers as well, and we're always interested in finding out more about people who are also homeschooled. Anyway, I don't know why
That's
I'm
all
talking
beside
about
the
that.
point.
All beside the point. Let's get into talking about our progress this week. We are in the middle of trying something brand new for us, which is improvisational writing, pantsing, discovery writing, however you want to call it. Pantsing is a weird word, by the way.
Yeah,
I don't like calling it that very much.
I was floating through the Twitter verse of kind of the writing community, and people use pantsing a lot. I had no idea what they're talking about. I had to ask someone about it.
It's a weird word to me. Like it doesn't.
I mean, I get it. It's flying by the seat of your pants.
Yeah, whatever. But
But
it comes off as like trying to have like a cool word for what I do, or something.
Oh man, I was just pantsing.
I was just pantsing it. Just pantsing it. Just trying to get through it.
Because that can't be misconstrued. Anyway.
Yeah, maybe it's the connection to pantsing somebody, which is not a positive thing to do. So I don't know.
What? No.
Pantsing somebody.
I know, but how is there any connection?
Oh, it's just anyway. We got off topic again. Anyway, let's get back to it. We are in the middle of discovery writing right now for the first time ever, and it's been going pretty good. We kind of had story ideas before that we were working on, and had done this whole 27 chapter or plot point structure, and kind of rushed our way through it and hadn't had it all planned out and figured out. And so part of it was, still discovery process, but we had, really tried to micromanage a lot of the structure of the story. And that led us to some dead ends that were frustrating for us, because we thought this would be our ticket to, actually finishing, if we plan it out so meticulously. Because in the past, we've kind of, planned out the beginning of the story and kind of like, I'll get to somewhere by the end of it. And, we thought if we actually did the whole thing, plotted out, we'd have more motivation and more of an idea of where we're going and be able to actually finish a first draft. But it turned out to be more difficult than that. And so we tried something radically new by starting over, for Johnny at least, starting over completely. And then for me, starting over with a relatively similar story, but letting ourselves discover it as we go along in the writing process. So we did that for about a week now. Is that right, John?
Yep, just about.
Yeah, and it's been going real well actually so far. I'm pleasantly surprised by how freeing it has been for me personally. I know both of us have talked a little bit about how not having a destination or a set destination necessarily, or a collection of plot points to connect has been very freeing in terms of allowing ourselves to write more poorly than we might otherwise.
Oh, yeah.
And not having a polished chapter at the end of our writing session, but rather having a mixture of brainstorm and kind of cool ideas and, kind of our natural tendency of just sort of putting whatever comes to mind on the page and not worrying about whether it's phrased correctly or whether we're telling too much necessarily, or if something could be condensed a little bit more perfectly and that kind of stuff, and letting it be a little more raw. And just keeping going, which is what we always thought we wanted to do anyway before. But it was harder when we knew what we wanted from the very beginning and kind of had to reverse engineer that from in the actual writing process, So talk a little bit about that process for you this week, John.
Yeah, there's definitely been an adjustment kind of phase to it. And I mean, every time I sit down to write, I notice the difference in the quality of my writing from when I kind of had an idea all the way through where the scene was going. And now I know the direction it's going, but I'm discovering so much more as I go, as opposed to before. Like, there's a scene I was writing just today where my main character was going to go up to a guy and ultimately be accused of theft and have to run away. That's the elevator pitch of the scene. And in the actual writing, it changed completely into something totally different, where instead of a negative experience because of an accusation and being a negative experience because of a realization of something else that had already happened. And the nature of the scene changed completely between the idea of the scene and the actual implementation, which is one of the nice things about discovery writing, because I feel like if you plotted it out to go a certain way, you would feel more obliged to fulfill the way you'd seen it, instead of kind of going with the curveball and interpreting the events as you think they ought to be instead of how you previously thought they should be.
Totally, yeah, because it's a completely different experience, thinking about your story sort of in abstract from the plotting perspective, and then actually getting in there in the scene and kind of seeing how it's flowing. And oftentimes I would definitely get into a scene and find that it wanted to take a different direction like that, and kind of resist that, though, because I'd be like, well, I'm going to have to change like my entire plot, for at least the next few chapters going forward. I'm going to have to like finagle the story to kind of go in the direction that this is tending now, but it's going to mean a lot of work and a lot of scrapping. And then am I just basically just starting over at that point and kind of giving up on what I had planned and all that kind of thing? And you really question yourself a lot more when you have this whole plot that you have already in place. Whereas in this process for me too, this has allowed me to kind of go with those tendencies and see where the story's flowing and kind of follow it down that rabbit hole a lot more than I ever thought, or than I was ever comfortable with before.
Yeah. With that, though, comes a certain limitation. And it maybe, well, I'll put it this way. When I would plot out chapters before, I had the whole 27-beat outline. But within like 3 chapters of wherever I was, I went ahead and wrote down all the things I wanted to establish in that chapter. For example, if there was a character named Darren and there's a character named Barnabas, the first chapter needed to establish the type of relationship they had, the way they felt about each other as friends and as an employer-employee relationship, and it needed to establish that they're very fond of one another. And so when I go to write the chapter, I know in advance the things I want to bring out of it, and so I put those in as I go because I know exactly what I'm trying to get to. With this, I can tell that my characterization and my descriptions are less polished and less well-developed because I don't know going in exactly what I want to get out of it, which is okay. It's totally okay, but it's an adjustment. I'm used to my writing from the plotting standpoint, from the plotting way we were doing things before. I was used to a certain quality of my writing as it came out first try, and that quality I feel like has definitely gone down. Again, it's a first draft. It's totally okay. If you're doing this along with us or writing your own thing and you feel like your writing isn't the best as you're putting it down, don't worry about it because you're going to go back and change it later anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's stressful though. It stresses me out when I feel like I'm not doing things as well as I could be or as well as I want to be, and so that's been the biggest thing I'm having to push through. I like the ideas that I'm coming up with, but I'm not as happy with the quality of my writing.
For sure, but like you were saying and we were saying before, it's easier to kind of accept that and kind of muscle through that intellectually.
True.
When I know that I'm probably not even going to keep this scene in the way that I've written it right now, especially when I'm writing the beginning of the book, because I'm going to discover so much more along the way as I continue through the book, and even if I have the same stuff happening in the beginning of the story, I'm probably going to rewrite the whole thing anyway from either a different perspective or emphasizing other things, or maybe a different location, or with different characters, depending on kind of how things go from here. And I've opened myself up to that possibility and likelihood even from the very beginning, and so I'm more okay with kind of imperfection in my writing, rather than feeling like I'm doing a first draft, but actually I want to make it perfect from the very beginning.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, and yeah, it I don't know exactly how to phrase it, but I know that conceptually, and I know that it's okay, and I know that I should expect a decrease in like the way my writing flows and the way like it doesn't feel as good to read. And I know I should accept that, but there's still like an adjustment period
For sure, yeah.
from before to now. And
yeah, I definitely had to remind myself of that today as I was writing too, and I was just like reading through what I had just written a second ago, and I was like, man, I could really do better with that. And I think specifically I was agonizing over how to phrase something in particular, like the sound that a crowd was making in this scene, what word specifically I should use to kind of give the emphasis to where I think it should be. And I kind of ended up just using a very generic word and kind of reminding myself, it doesn't matter for now. You're spending way too much time on this specific word choice right here when we really need to get through the rest of this thing and see what's happening with the character.
Yeah.
And so I just used a very generic word and kept going. So it definitely takes that conscious reminder, though.
Yeah. Have you noticed a difference in the pacing of the novel so far?
I'm not that far in yet, but a little bit, actually, yeah. I think I've given myself more permission to take my time, honestly, in the beginning. The two scenes I've written that are over 1,000 words each, which is pretty short. There's not a lot there yet. But those two scenes have really not had much sort of in the way of big action or like big discoveries happening. It's really I'm letting myself set the tone a little bit more from the beginning and kind of discover who these characters are and where they are in their own world in relation to their own world right now. Because I don't know for sure yet, and so I'm kind of figuring that out as I'm going, rather than already kind of feeling I know those things and then jumping right into like them discovering some world-altering revelation or something. Even though I do have like some ideas for that later on, and I keep notes of those ideas just in case I want to use them.
Right.
But, first and foremost, making sure I'm establishing things, discovering the characters in the world, and then kind of going from there. It's
interesting because I'm finding myself more willing to kind of skip through time a little bit.
For sure, yeah.
Not in a significant way, but that's one of the things I mentioned before while we were doing the 27-beat structure that I struggled with was the passage of time. I like to write like moment by moment almost, and I know that's not viable. And I have to make myself allow some time to pass. And in the first 2,000 words of this thing already, I'm finding that I've been much more okay with saying, and so he did that, and then this happened. Like skipping that. I don't have to describe what him walking to the marketplace looks like.
Or exactly
I can say he walked to the marketplace.
The puddle he stepped in as he was walking through the alleys to get to where he's going, that kind of thing.
Right. There's a couple things that happen on the way there, but it's a passage of a few hours, and we're only like two things happen. And so, I find myself more willing and better able to identify those times when I can skip some time. I've in the first 2,000 words, I've spent a whole afternoon, whereas before the first 2,000 words, I think took place over the course of about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Because I just couldn't. I wanted to make this first scene as rich and as full as I possibly could, which is good. And your writing should be rich and full of information that should be known, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has to take place over the course of one linear piece of time.
Yeah, for sure. And so far, all of what I've written so far does take course over a pretty linear piece of time, although I've allowed myself to kind of jump around a little bit, like walking across a field or something like that.
Yeah.
But I know exactly what you mean, and that is a very technical skill that authors need to master. Zooming in and out narratively in terms of both time and distance and all those sorts of things are definitely things that you should use very intentionally for effect. That neither of us really have much practice with yet. But I agree. This is definitely allowing me to, as part of the not worrying about perfection thing. It's allowing me to kind of give myself permission to jump forward in time or summarize certain things that I might otherwise kind of go into like agonizing detail on. And maybe too much, but that's better than not enough, because then if your tendency is to flesh things out too much, then you can always go back and flesh those things out later if you really need to.
Right.
You know, better to kind of have less specificity in that case maybe than more. I don't know. I guess we'll find out.
And it's also making me feel like, you know, there was a certain word count I was kind of going for the finished novel through a first draft, and I think I can actually decrease that a lot, because I can definitely tell already that with this sort of discovery written improvisational way of doing this, I'm going to end up with a lot more bare bones, with a lot of room to build things up and change a lot of stuff to make it more rich and full and make the writing feel more alive. Because this is very much like so far, I mean, reading through it, I can definitely tell it's a bit of a skeleton in terms of sort of the richness that I had before.
For sure, yeah. But once you get that top-down view, kind of bird's eye view of the entire thing, written out, and actually, you know, maybe you can make a plot out of the things you've actually written so far, and then kind of look at that and say, "Ooh, I need more pacing changes here," or "I need, you know, maybe this character could move back here," or whatever. You know, you can go on from on high and kind of manipulate things once you have that framework. But the important thing, as we always keep saying, is to have that framework in place in the first place.
Right.
Excuse me. Anything else you were thinking about this week? Any challenges with the new process that you were still kind of figuring out how to overcome, or anything like that?
No, I found that there's less variation in the ebb and flow of the writing. So before, there would be sessions where I sit down, and I think it was probably because sometimes you're trying to fit sort of the square block into a round hole, so to speak. But I felt like I couldn't get out what my plot said I should get out. What I was supposed to write next in the plot, I didn't feel right then, or I couldn't see it properly. And so some sessions would be very unproductive, and then some I would be really in the zone, loving what I was writing and really feeling it, and I would, you know, go really fast. I find there's less variation now, that you're kind of just writing whatever you're feeling like in any given moment. So, you know, whatever you want to write, you're writing it, and there's less of that bottled up, unable to write, kind of less of those sessions.
Totally. I totally agree. So far, I found the same thing. I've written about 1,200 words at all the sessions I've sat down to so far, and which haven't been more than about an hour and a half a piece.
Yeah, right.
I haven't had a ton of time at any one time to write. But I would also we used to have those sessions where I would write 3,000 words, rarely, but sometimes, and then some where I would write 250. That was far more common. I agree, because I was feeling like I needed to tackle this next plot point in the series, instead of kind of letting it flow out and kind of just going with the impulses that were striking me at the moment. And it's been a lot easier to have a productive session regularly with this method so far. And again, a lot of it's not going to end up in the final draft, I'm sure, but it's at least words on paper, and it's progressing us towards that end goal. I wrote a scene today that I had no idea what was going to come out when I sat down. Whereas the first scene I wrote, I guess for the last podcast episode, I had some idea of what I was doing and kind of some plans going into it. This one, I basically knew what the character was, the POV character for the scene was, and kind of roughly what he was doing in the beginning of it. But I ended up discovering a lot of his relationship with a couple other characters, what he's basically wanting in the story, kind of his why for his actions, essentially, his relationship to the events going on in the world, all through this sort of scene of him meeting with fellow kind of co-conspirators in a cellar that I had no idea was going to be the setting for the scene. But as I sat down, I just kind of saw it, and I knew kind of the tone I wanted to set, but that's pretty much it. And then it just kind of flowed from there. It was very cool. It was very satisfying.
At the same time, where we were talking before, sometimes your scenes can lack a little bit of the broadness, I guess, and the color that comes from knowing things ahead of time. At the same time, you discover so many little details that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise, and put them in, and it really fills things out to where I don't know. There's a certain element of the story that comes out when you're discovering it instead of plotting it. It's hard to describe.
It is, yeah. It is really hard to describe, but yeah, I'm really enjoying it so far. We're going to keep going this next week and kind of see how it continues to go. I still want to be vigilant to avoid kind of rambling off into kind of these tangents and stuff. I want to keep focused on the story that I want to write and kind of keep thinking about that when I'm not writing, kind of the big picture wise, but not so specifically that it kind of detracts from this discovery process as well, which is a hard balance to strike, but that's what I'm kind of focusing on for this next coming week, is to spend some time thinking about where is this going, what are the themes I want to cover, what are the relationships I want to show and emphasize, while still kind of allowing it to organically kind of come out of me. So, yeah. We'll see how it goes. Anything else to add, John?
Yeah, I'll tack on one little thing here. For me, the point at which I'm going to kind of stop and look forward again is during my commute to work, I often will just think about my story and where it's going and what's going on. And I've plotted out in my head, like not made a plot line or an outline or anything like that, but thought in my head the storyline up to like chapter 3 or 4 or something probably, but a series of events that takes place, and you get to know the main character and the primary side character during that time. And so at the end of that 3 or 4 chapters worth of stuff that I've kind of mentally thought of that I want to pursue, that's when I'm going to stop and kind of say, okay, now what's the next thing that's going to happen here, and how is it going to progress towards the overall plot? And also, what is the overall plot, and where are we going?
Because you're very much starting from scratch, much more than I am, and kind of discovering the story as well as the world and that kind of stuff, even more than I am, because I'm kind of basing this on a pre-existing idea, so that makes a lot of sense.
Right, which is kind of weird, too. It's funny. I feel a lot more freedom to kind of play around because I don't know where I'm going yet.
Yeah, there's no
But
stakes,
that means I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm not pushing towards anything. I can just sit back for a second and explore the world, which is definitely a very first draft thing to do, because overall the story needs to know where it's going. But for now, it's fine to explore the world and explore the characters and find what I like and who I like, and make some B plot and find where the story ought to go.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we're not published authors on a deadline schedule or anything like that. We have the luxury of time to kind of tease this process out and really discover what works best for us. And they shouldn't feel any pressure to rush through it at all. If this turns out to be kind of a glorified writing exercise, that's great.
All the better for it.
Yeah, as long as it's productive and you discover something along the way about the process. So yeah,
we're playing the long game.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm really feeling like this is going to be something that definitely edges us towards that end goal of finishing a draft. And
I agree for sure.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it so far. I highly recommend it. If you're a hardcore plotter yourself, I highly recommend letting go of that a little bit and trying out some more improvisational methods.
If
you're
only
having
as
trouble.
an exercise.
Yeah, if only as an
even
exercise.
Even if you're not struggling, as an exercise to kind of feel what that's like. I mean, even Brandon Sanderson, who's a notorious plotter, he says he discovery writes his characters to keep that sort of fresh feeling there. So it's a good exercise for anyone.
You mean like he'll discovery write his characters to discover more about them, kind of, but then write them into the story differently than the scenes he discovery writes, or he'll actually like write scenes of the characters and like in the story and discovery write them?
Hold on, let me ask him. I'll get him on the phone. What he specifically means by that. I forgot to ask that when I was talking to him earlier.
Oh boy, yes, he's good friends with Brandon Sanderson.
I don't know. He just said he discovery writes his characters. What do you want from me?
Fair enough. Okay. Anyway, let's wrap things up there. You guys can find us on social media at World Builders Anonymous. Our email address, let me see if I can get this time, is wbapodcast@gmail.com.
Indeed.
Yes, I got it. And our Reddit page, I'll let Johnny explain to you because I don't understand it.
Jeez. You need to understand, Vito. No one goes to Reddit pages for people. Like, that's barely a thing, and no one cares about it.
But they exist.
They technically exist, but no one would ever want to go
to
to
our
page.
So someone should go to our
dumb.
page since it exists.
We frequent, on occasion, the fantasy writers and the fantasy subreddits. If you want to look out for maybe a question we'll ask or a prompt, maybe even eventually read some of the old stuff we've written, It may or may not at some point be posted to probably the fantasy.
Yeah, let
Writer
us know if
subreddit
that's
for
something you
that.
guys would be interested in. Is maybe taking a look at some of the things we're working on right now to just kind of get an example of what we're talking about in terms of being okay with imperfection and that sort of thing, and the difference between what we wrote before and what we're writing now. If that would be at all helpful for you at all, if you think, let us know via email or social media, and we would definitely consider doing that. Let us know if you have any ideas like that you would like to see on the podcast as well. We're open to suggestions and stuff. Leave us an iTunes review if you have time, and that would help us out a lot. And we will see you next week.
And as always, send us your money, please. Thank you.
We got to figure that process out at some point. Anyway.
Sure.
Okay, bye.
All right, see you guys.
This show is sponsored in part by Audible. Visit worldbuildersanonymous.com/audible to check out what the guys are listening to right now and to receive a free audiobook.